So we have Brad and Brad, and I think it would be easier. Maybe I got to go Brad W and Brad G. How do people typically address you two when you're in the same room or on the same screen as we're doing at the moment?
Go for it, Brad. I'll let you take this one, man.
I think that they either refer to us as Glauser and Walker, or BG and B Dub.
Yep.
B Dub.
Yeah. Or if it's the Brads, they want to say it like something collectively. Say, Brad, what do you think? Like, all right, the Brads. We're going to ask you guys. That's another lovingly term.
Well, I'm prefacing because I feel like I'm going to say, Brad, what do you think? And then I'm just going to keep turning my head back and forth.
Yeah. So, and then whichever one speaks first is the one you were talking to.
Whoever's eyes light up the most, I'll know this is meant for them.
Hey.
Okay, so I did what really sparked this is well, you're very insightful and funny on the on LinkedIn. So that one was to Brad G, not
oh, I know, I can tell.
Oh, I see.
And you're not wrong.
But I made a post as I do on the first of every year about trends and what I think is coming, and Brad G commented his 5 predictions for the year. So I think it'll be interesting to have those be talking points and spark the conversation today. So
yeah, let's dive in.
But I also want this to be, I think you guys are both out of the Pacific Northwest, so have specific climate zones and code jurisdictions and trends in that, just as I do in the Northeast, but this is more of a kind of holistic United States domestic facade conversation, just to keep everybody in mind. But it'll be interesting to hear some of the things that you guys are experiencing that are probably similar and different to the Northeast. So the first one is more. And what does that mean? I think Brad G was alluding to more in terms of bigger glazing assemblies, triple glazing, thicker panes, bigger thermal breaks, heavier extrusions. So when we think about performance on the operational energy side, so better thermal performance versus embodied carbon side, more material, they sort of counteract one another. So if we think about more, are the facade assemblies going to become heavier, more complex, more intensive to meet the code requirements, or are we going to think about less and lightening things up?
I say yes. I mean, yes to all of those things. I think that as complexity drives performance, as complexity drives the market, and I think geographically performance means something very different in each zone. Solar heat gain coefficient is big in one market, CRF is in another market, U value is in some markets. Overall, everybody's got performance. I think as you want more, the architects want more. They want more design. They want more feature. So they want structural. They want big moments. They want big, just eye-catching, eye-grabbing. Let's push the boundaries of what steel can do or what aluminum can do or what the glass can do and so on. They want to have the bigger, better, badder thing. But with that comes, that more architects tend to want to use similar features on their buildings. Costs go down. Unitized curtain wall wasn't everybody's cup of tea 15 years ago, right? Most people, unitized curtain wall was priced way up here. It was thought of as this creature that only certain companies could handle. Other companies started picking it up. I think we're going to see that same evolution of now unitized curtain wall is kind of more of a standard, and stick or ladders are not something that's even used in a lot of markets. But that structural elements, those big, beefy 20-foot glass. I want 30-foot, high double stack units to be. So I think the more is going to push it, but also it's going to drive certain costs down. So we'll see more of the more. If that
what did you just say?
Whatsoever.
Sticks and ladders. Is that a terminology used for stick built curtain wall?
Probably.
Yeah.
No, so every market's different, right? Like every market kind of has its own terms. So I can't say that that's a geographically overarching term that everybody uses, but sticks and ladders, sticks where you're using sticks of stock length material and you're building ladders assembled in the field that are then glazed in the field as well. But it could be that it's called something else somewhere else. I know that they call sealants. Sealants are a lot of things. In Louisiana, they call sealants like pookie. So if anybody out there has heard pookie as a term, in Seattle, nobody knows pookie.
Some of my southern friends, I've heard Pookie Dust, but that's the first. So I'm going to reference him to this conversation. All right, so I'm going to go to Brad G now and ask, I think no matter what climate zone you're in, nobody would be opposed to lightening up the structure. So nobody wants a heavier structure, more cast in place concrete than is necessary. And then I hear in certain markets, people interested in or talking about mass timber. So do you think we're going to see evolving changes to the structure, and then inherently what facade assemblies are feasible for that type of structure?
I do. I think we're going to see a lot of that change in just structure of buildings in general, just because I think there's the main top 5 of construction when GCs go to buyout and developers really kind of consider what the project performance is going to be. They're looking at MEP, structural, and envelope. Those are the main 5, right? So as you look at that and develop that structure is probably one of the heaviest cost items to the project. So now we're going to leverage that asset, what that cost is, against that development. Structure has to evolve. You know what I mean? It's rather than the concrete core being with cantilever structure, we're looking at maybe some different moment frame stuff happening with different materiality. I think that's going to be driven by probably a marketing world of sustainability into that cross-laminated timber, the CLT stuff. But I think that, I think the evolution of that is that we've seen so much core development over the last market cycle. In the heavier metro markets, we've been seeing so much core development happening. I think now we're looking at that sub-market as far as those interstitial areas start to kind of rise up. So as a result of that, normally it used to be like as market kind of spreads far and wide, they just gonna go wide. I think we're going to see those other suburban markets start to kind of rise in that mid-rise level area, which is going to challenge, I think, structure from happening a lot more efficiently. So CLT is a thing that's been talked about a lot, but I think there's a sustainability to it aspect that actually is bringing the municipalities and like the city, county, state area of just saying, hey, look, we'll give you a bonus density if you can be using these types of products in that. And I know that that's what's currently happening in our market right now. So a 10-story turns into a 12-story, 15-story turns into a 17-story without the impact fees involved. And so that's just because of the evolution of the structure involved. And so you're looking at different ways to kind of go into that development package. By now you're looking at how that structure is going to be utilized. So I do think there's evolution of that, but that also comes with different things for the facade. So now you're looking at becoming, okay, how are we anchoring? What are the different interstitial parts and pieces to those CLT structures? I think evolution is inside of that too, as far as how the attachment methods are going to be from a facade function standpoint, which I think are really new. It'd be interesting to deep dive into some of those different connection studies as far as what's looking into like a unitized curtain wall or a large pre-glazed window wall onto a CLT structure. What are the movement points inside of those things? What's the char rate of a fire rated thing for CLT? Like there's some different questions that come in and that are going to be asked there, but I think that's the evolution of what we're going to see in structure for sure.
Do you think some of these secondary markets are prepared to take on some of these trends, like a Milwaukee or a Kansas City or some of these other markets you've seen in the Midwest? I mean, you have high-rise markets like a Boston, New York, whatever, Miami, Seattle, that I think have general contractors and architects that are prepared to design and build around high-rise construction and the efficiencies that come along with it. How do you think we just see this further differentiation between very, very progressive cities like Boston and Seattle, where they have stringent energy codes and all these sort of innovative technologies, versus the secondary markets? Is it just going to become more widespread, or some of the practices do you think are going to become more intertwined?
I'll do a short answer of this one because I want to hear Walker's opinion on it too. I think there's a limitation in those secondary markets at the general contractor and developer level, and how sophisticated those cities and municipalities are as far as how to get stuff through, or maybe be innovative about process. I think there's that, but it's gonna, I think, force the general contractors that were in those metro markets to maybe make another secondary team market expansion, like from a Boise, or from a Seattle to a Boise, from a Portland to a Boise, right? Or from a Tri-Cities market back into, I don't know, like Baltimore area, like some of those different things, right? So how that expands, I think that's going to be a thing we'll probably have to see, because I just don't know if cities are going to be that innovative to understand how code's going to push them that way, right? So that's a thought there. I mean, there's probably a lot to that, but go ahead, Walker. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak for the small to mid-sized Glazers, especially because they didn't ask me to, and I like to do things I'm not supposed to do. So, they're not going to rise up instantly overnight to the complexities of some of the things that will be happening, but I will say that they are capable of doing that kind of thing. They're just not often given the shot or the chance to do so. So I think in our industry, construction in general, it becomes a lot of traveling crews. When you talk about smaller markets or areas that this hasn't quite gotten to, you want to talk, Wyoming or South Dakota or things like that, it's going to be traveling crews that ended up showing up and doing the work from other cities, larger fringe cities. But for the large work that is a little bit more architectural in its visual aesthetic, I don't think that stuff is going to continue to merge itself into the smaller markets as much. I think those are going to stay. Like if you look at some Texas markets where thermal values aren't really a thing to worry about, solar heat gain, tends to be something. They still build giant glass boxes to a certain degree because they can get away with it. And there's not much requirement to do anything else. So I think there will be some moments, but I think it'll be driven more by the owner or the developer or whoever's, putting that project on there versus market trends. I don't think those fringe markets like a Milwaukee, I would consider to be a little bit more fringe market than a Chicago or a New York or a Boston. They're not going to follow that trend of what's going on in the bigger markets until they're absolutely forced to.
How much of this is code driven or required versus common sense? Like, I was talking to let me give the example of a Nashville building, multifamily building, and they don't want to use operable vents, and the mechanical consultant told the owner, we don't want that unwanted humid air coming into our conditioned space in the hotter months. And I'm like, so that's when they close their window. Like, that's when they have the option and the freedom to open and close the window. So you laugh, but like,
I'm laughing.
Looked at a project in Houston, and they said, this is a hot market. People don't open their windows. And sometimes I'm like, that little question mark, and
yeah.
And so I don't know how much of this is like, we've done it this way forever, and so this is not how we do it. And again, what's really difficult about these conversations is, I kind of, the first phase of my career was on the facade consulting side on unitized curtain wall, doing these monumental Perma-Stelisa, Benson enclosed jobs. And I really had to unlearn that that's not the market. That's not business as usual. It's like, if that's all you come from, and then the next phase was, okay, I got into punch windows and window wall and started working in other markets. But like, all these super progressive cities and progressive technologies versus what's actually happening all across the country, I think people forget that, like, we just focus on the hyper high-end sort of outlier projects and aren't addressing what's actually happening across the country.
I think that there's a big moment that fringes between a project's desires and what it should be. So I think that performance drives so much of everything, and then human wants or project wants or architectural wants sort of sit on top of that, and they've got to split the difference. So for our market, um, there we went forever without operable vent being tied to a commercial job at all. From an envelope standpoint, we have a lot of water that exists, just general moisture. And so the concept was we don't want that because we want to have a envelope that's sealed up and doesn't have any possibilities for water infiltration and so
And we're
on.
talking Seattle, so everyone knows.
Seattle specifically.
And did that climb or bleed down from the leaky condo crisis in Vancouver and sort of proximity and fear?
In part, I think in part it's always in the mind of we got to fish tank a lot of these buildings just to make sure nothing is going to come in. But the other side of that is if somebody just leaves their window open and it's not controlled or monitored and so on, because it's not every building that has automatic shuts or lock sensors or open sensors or anything.
So do you have code ventilation requirements to meet, like in New York, 5% of the floor area?
We do now. I think that's the point of it. And like, I think that's where he wants, because he's going to get to a point here that's interesting. And I want to interject and answer that question because it's when you talk about Houston and Nashville and that that's a fixed curtain wall or fixed envelope facade, right? Those are things you're talking about. Now, birthing out of that, we used to be that primarily. And I think there was habit to that. There was, maybe you think about, was it from this market thing? To tell you the truth, I think it was because of the nature of distribution that was actually considered pre-glazed unitized product and how it got to market. I mean, there was only like 3 or 4 guys here for probably 30 years that really kind of controlled that unitized curtain wall facade market. And what they did is that they built fixed unitized curtain wall extremely well. They designed and supported architects and developers extremely well for decades, right? And so there's a how to do it, right? And then they use interstitially, like, oh, if you want to add it, or if you want to, like if we have a roof access door, we'll have to just put a large operable window in there, and that was kind of like the only operable thing that happened to get within that all glass facade. So I think the evolution was like, because we always did it, that's the way it was. I don't know if there was actually like a true because of that condo crisis thing that's there. But what evolved for us was what I think was where he was going to go is I'll let you kind of take this, because there was an interesting evolution that was driven by owner and occupant desires. But go ahead.
So we have I mean, nothing was becoming operable into these things until a certain large scale web-based home delivery system based out of Seattle that may own, I don't know, everything that we do in every part of our world, rhymes with Ramaron. They have a requirement that requires an operable vent be placed every 10 feet on the exterior facade of buildings that they occupy. They want that because they want the employee control, the ability for somebody to open a window if they want to open a window and so on. They want that human feel. They want to bridge the space between commercial space and what it's like to just be able to open a window and have control over a space.
And let's preface a single hung window in a curtain wall.
A single hung operable vent preferable. There have been a couple others that have been folded in. There was some pop outs, some 4-sided pop outs, and some other elements where they built for it, but the desired approach was a single hung operable 0 sightline vent inside a unitized curtain wall facade. So that changed the whole dynamic, because now people were putting that in their buildings just for the potential of that, because now there was a human expectation where I worked at this place and they all had it, or I'm going to maybe hope to have that as a tenant, or a like company as a tenant who wants to be like that. So now it became more of a steady popularity where it had been shelved and shut down for decades. Now it's part of the facade all the time. Now you have to build for it. You have to accommodate for it. You have to seal for it. You have to understand, how does that now interact with the HVAC in the mechanical sides of things. What does it mean? What sort of sensors or operables, or how far will it open? How much will it open? Will it close? Is it anything automatic in there? There's so much that goes beyond that now because it was driven by somebody at the development owner tenant side that says, this is my demand. Let's conform to that now. That pushed it in our market. Otherwise, I don't believe that we would have operable vents in our buildings at all.
But that's on the commercial side. And so if you find operable windows, on the office side. So if you find operable windows in office spaces in New York City, it's solely, for the most part, has custodial hardware, and they use it so that they can clean the windows from the inside.
Sure.
That's a weird New York thing that they, for whatever reason, everywhere else, they don't like cleaning the glass from the inside, but in New York, that's a preference. What about residential? If you're cooking, if it's hot, if people want nighttime ventilation, that's not like an occupant desire.
No, it is. And I would think that residential operable windows have always remained in our market, for sure. I would say that that's
although, a lot of it depends on the builder, how they're spacing their units out at, where it can fold at in terms of the exterior. A lot of times a small balcony door or a small terrace door qualifies as an opening to the exterior. So there are a lot of projects that we have that are there. That is, aside from a potential fresh air vent or something that's built into the system, not a window, not an operable component per se, that door, and sometimes it's just a small slider with a Juliet balcony. So it's not even a real space moment where you get to go into a secondary space.
Hey man, I'll take what I could get. That sounds great. I'm talking about people who live in a multifamily building with either all fixed windows or curtain wall and have no means of ventilation in their living space.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I think that ventilation has become a trend that actually allows for that occupant to have demand over it, but it's adapted now it's become within a code driven performance thing that natural ventilation is now required because of just occupant comfort, how that even it's valued even in saying, hey, we've got a balcony area, we've got an open door, we've got some of those different things in a retail sales marketing piece, right? So there's, I think, because of that stuffiness that has been happening over how closed in those older residential projects were, I think now it's almost become a staple in my mind.
You know what? You didn't have this on the list, but that's interesting one too. I was going to think about like in a post-COVID world, the desire to have fresh air, natural ventilation in your living space. So maybe that if people are looking at two different apartments, one has it, one doesn't, that might be a value proposition. And B, do you think in this world where people are leaving cities and offices are so competitive to attract tenants and even multifamily, these small little nuances or features might stand out more than they once did?
I think they 100% stand out. I mean, we just got done with a project working on it for the past couple of years through that COVID world where it was actually at fresh air, vents were required within the 2015 energy code thing. But on top of that, they wanted to actually have operable vents in each one of the products. It's a unitized curtain wall facade, 31-story apartment tower, and they wanted to make sure that there was actually an operable vent on top of the required fresh air vent that was there because of that marketability for that tenant. And
well, even so far, sorry to cut you off, but I already did to deal with it. So they even put they wanted that to be there as a tenant selling point,
correct,
more than anything, and they did it pushing past the fact that the exterior facade was telling them no, because it's a facade that moves in and out 5 to 10 degrees. So now you have to deal with hardware issues and making sure you're still in ADA compliance with the amount of force to make sure that when it is tilted in, it doesn't take a tremendous amount more. And if it's tilted out, it doesn't get away from you, or vice versa. When you're closing it, it doesn't slam back. So there was a lot of pressure, so to speak, from the facade that said, don't put operable vents in me. And they still knew that from a sell point, from a desire point, from a I need to lure people from the building across the street or somewhere else. So that's the piece I need. But we're in a market where that has now become more of a trend. I think I'm going to say a number and people are going to believe it, and it's maybe true. I would Google it, but I believe for us, in terms of air conditioned units that are inside residential facilities in ours, we're probably at 30%. 30% of our occupied residential real estate in a city environment or a multifamily tower environment has air conditioning. The other 70% has nothing.
I'm going to tell a quick story. I stayed in an Airbnb last time I was in Vancouver, and I spent a lot of money on it thinking it's cheaper than the hotel, but this is still a nice Airbnb. And I stayed there, and everyone that I was visiting, it was a project team, was like, why are you staying in that part of town? And I learned this area where it was on a freeway. It was next to a sports stadium, and there was no air conditioning. So I had to open the window to breathe and be able to somewhat sleep. And so I'm listening to the freeway and the this and the this, and living in a somewhat modern building without air conditioning kind of baffled me, and I've never experienced it in my life. And I think it's when you get accustomed to sleeping in the exact AC temperature you want with your right noise and your this, you get a little removed from society. Yeah. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call. But then they told me, the people in the market in Vancouver, that every new building that's being built for the most part incorporates some type of conditioned mechanical system. But for a very long time, that was not the norm.
It has been not the norm for a very long time. And that pushes the performance. Like, you could build it to mitigate that noise, right? Making sure your STC or your OITC, whether it's coming through the glass or the aluminum, however that sounds traveling, you can mitigate that completely. But it fails 100% when you have to open a window to let air come through, right? Because now it's like that scene from Ace Ventura when he's closing and opening the door while he's screaming. It doesn't matter if you have to open it, you're going to hear all this stuff you just mitigated through your STC and OITC performance values.
Yep.
So one's going to rain on another one, right?
Next trend, which kind of leads to this, is window to wall ratio. So I think this is really energy code driven and market specific driven. But there is, and I'm trying to be cognizant of some of the other markets. There's this, let's try to be as unbiased as possible as glass people, because I post about punch windows and whatever opaque area, and the whole glass industry gets all, we got to get back to curtain wall. And it's, there's still glass in the building. It's 40% glass. So right. Let's think about other markets. What do you think the general perception is the thought that opaque area is cheaper than glass? And because it depends if you're talking about like a panelized defis or hand-laid brick or metal panel, but some people look at all glass and think that's too expensive and we got to incorporate opaque areas. So there's the energy code side of it, and then there's the cost side of it.
Let me take the energy code side of it. I'll let Walker take the cost side of it. Let's do that. Let's kind of unpeel the onion a little bit. So energy code is now developing within the 2021 IECC that is actually strictly around window to wall ratios. And then it also actually is built, that's the skeleton that's kind of been built on because of the performance incentives that have been there since the past 10 years, right? So they've just kind of filtered down into the energy code. Because at the end of the day, a lot of what happens in the HVAC side of things, the heat recovery units, a lot of those different things that are there are based upon how efficient that envelope is. And you could go to all of the envelope consultants and talk about the inefficiency of how the glazed area versus the opaque area. But notwithstanding, so to kind of go down that path, I think it's driven by the window wall ratio is driven by energy code, but I think there's a demand inside of allowing that natural light and allowing that relationship to indoor outdoor, I think is extremely wanted regardless of the project. So it's built upon, there's going to be window to wall ratios that are going to say, okay, if we're inside of a grocery store project, or if we're inside of a residential multifamily, or if we're looking at a hospital healthcare, looking at K through 12, and those are going to be built upon a certain strata inside of what's going to be allowed under prescriptive codes versus what's going to be allowed under total performance packages. And we've seen benchmarks across the nation talk about window to wall ratios, and that's, I think, a hot topic. But I think it sits upon a structure where the code is adjacent to how you're actually valuing what that project use is. I think there's some intelligence that we're not connecting between what actually type of project is versus what we're looking at for a code thing. And so I don't know, window to wall ratios, I think, are going to expand. That was my prediction. I think they're going to allow for that, because that natural light effect and how people want to have that relationship with indoor outdoor are going to be wanted, but also the evolution of those window areas versus the opaque areas, or those glazed areas versus the opaque areas. Those systems are going to become very, very intelligent and almost become, in my mind, a copacetic thermal value to something that's opaque. But I'll let him go ahead and take over the cost topic.
I think from a cost topic, like every job has two forms of currency, right? There's time and there's money. If you've got time, then the money's less important, and vice versa, right? So you got two things that happen. On a lot of jobs, there is a perception, and then sometimes there's actually a fact and reality that a glass assembly, whether it's a unitized curtain wall or stick-built curtain wall or a window wall or however it's on there, is often more expensive than a panel on stud, right? Like if you're just, but there's a lot of costs that are on the other side of that are not often put into the equation in terms of, you've got to sheet that, you got to, basically create an exterior facade, and then you're sort of cladding over it. So it's a secondary approach to more the curtain wall or the window wall is going to be more of a finished solution. So this is like the last piece of the wall that you're sort of putting the hair and makeup on, if you're talking about panel on stud kind of thing, or something on a girded system, or however it works. But in reality, the smartest projects we've seen are the ones who look at it from a total exterior standpoint. And once the curtain wall guys got it out of their head that it's not just glass and aluminum formed panel that can go inside a system, figure it out, get smart, and you can do the whole thing. So now it becomes, maybe your cost is a pinch higher if you look at it from a early standpoint, but your time allowance and how quickly you can close or turn over floors one after the other and go right to your internal trades and get your shoring moved and get everything else done. So it can become very affordable, because the economy of scale, the more that I give to that, the more aluminum I can buy, the more panels I'm purchasing that are similar, whether it's a brick facade, a stone facade, terracotta. We've seen a little bit of everything be included into these curtain walls, where we see these projects completed and it's a complete unitized curtain wall system, and you have no idea, because you don't have your typical stack joint looks and feels, and you can point to it, because we can all point to it and go like, that's a unitized curtain wall, that's a window wall, that's a hybrid, that's a this. There's a lot of these projects, it is really damn hard to figure out that it's actually unitized on the entire facade. And that is because they decided to go smart early and take all the time and reduce the costs. So if they do it right, they do it right.
This goes to Brad's next point on prefab. And I did a couple kind of, you're right, that you can sit there and analyze buildings and figure out what type of system it is. And New Hudson Facades did this a lot in the Northeast, and you see a lot of the unitizers doing it, incorporating all this stone and, as you said, terracotta and just high opaque areas into a unitized assembly. And I had someone from SGH ask me, interestingly, because he was trying to explain to a client how to explain to non-facade people that something that's not all glass can still be a curtain wall. So exactly, I mean, it's a little hard for people to wrap their head around, because people just assume curtain wall, a lot of glass, and
correct.
And the whole unitizing concept and a non-load bearing system that's hung off the slab like a curtain kind of simplifies it. But to your point, I guess what you're saying is the prefab approach, even if they do have the time, let's say they do have the time, because I still see projects in these secondary markets, Atlanta, Nashville, high-rise buildings where they're bringing in knockdown mullions glass gaskets and literally stick building the punched openings in a high-rise building. And let's assume they have all the time in the world, all the labor in the world. Can an argument still be made that if they prefab or unitized that facade, there would be inherent cost savings?
I think that last question on Adrian, like is the inherent cost savings goes back to the original point. What Walker says is that there's time and there's money, and that equals cost.
Well, exactly. The general conditions, all your insurance to hold on to the construction site. That's what we're talking. Right. The opportunity cost of turning the units over that many weeks or months earlier.
So I think that the opening the box of like looking inside the cost bucket is really those two columns is really time and money. And they don't always coincide. And so that's why I think what the Walker's pointing out is I will say concisely that the majority of what you can look towards prefab for a project is going to save overall cost. And it's anchored in those two areas of time and money. So it's a place where I would look at is a little bit more, rather than just dollars associated with the cost, it's time and money.
I'll argue to the fact of it depends on how you're putting your costs together and who's putting that cost, out to the general contractor. Because if you tell me that your field labor is more affordable than shop labor, I don't understand that market then, right? Like if you're telling me that I can have somebody build this in the field at field labor numbers, then it's a labor market that I don't understand. Because in certain labor, our market specifically, Seattle and other markets that I know that are union type markets are driven a little bit more in that union mentality. It is much more cost effective to build that in a shop and use a shop labor moment and provide a covered area where you're building it factory style versus in the field. I think there's a lot of cost savings to be understood there. Also to have the space and time to fill out and have all that layout space to basically be fabricating or building all this stuff on site. That takes up a lot of real estate that you have to have in and around the job site area itself to have all that sort of happening. So there's a lot of cost that goes into that versus having trucks delivered with exterior wall pieces ready to go and set in place.
Aside from just the facade contracting labor rates, like Boston is a union town, so everything is very driven by the field labor. Where New York, we have non-union laborers, yet everything in New York is unitized, and it's because of the cost of construction and carrying out a site and permitting and everything associated with that.
Space alone, where are you going to set up a person to be able to put all these sticks on site and all these glass racks on site? Because that's the other side. If you're building it on site, you've got glass on site, you've got 40 glass racks that you've got to accommodate for. Where are you going to do that in Midtown?
Do you have a lot of hand-laid brick in Seattle?
No.
Lower rise stuff, I would say up to 7 stories is probably where we go on it.
I still can't figure out how to date I see 20, 30-story buildings with double-decker, double-height scaffolding, hand-laying brick, and how it's cost-effective.
Yeah, we don't see that. That is not seen.
All over the city, all over, all the boroughs.
The Masons have it dialed in, I guess. I don't know.
I know, yeah, there just might be an incredibly sort of thorough labor pool here where you go in other markets and they just can't find the Masons to do it.
They've got the right labor, the right, sourcing of all the parts and pieces. I can't imagine it. I mean, because we're less brick driven than a lot of markets anyway. But I can't imagine it.
So let's go to the next topic, retrofit in existing buildings, because this is a all markets sort of topic, but interestingly, I think Seattle's very interesting with the existing building stock. You go down to San Francisco and even to Chicago, Philadelphia, whatever. So I had lunch with our buddy Nick Bagatellos on Sunday. He was visiting the city.
Bags.
And
love that dude.
He is
the innovation station.
That's I go back to your video with him from Glass Build. Was it 4 years ago? 5 years ago?
Yeah, 4 years ago.
2019. Yeah.
Yeah.
So his thing right now is this single pane retrofits with VIG and addressing all the existing building stock. So, we have a healthy debate about it, and that would be an interesting topic for us to bring him on here to discuss. But
Would love to.
what drives building owners to upgrade the buildings? I think some people look at stuff like Local Law 97 or Berto and think, oh, the owners are going to start getting fined. I'll tell you the truth. An owner's going to pay a $50,000 fine way before he's going to do a $3.5 million upgrade to his building. The upgrades to the building are not purely driven by the reduction in operational energy costs. That's a secondary benefit to it. There's some underlying or greater motive, whether it's we have leaking windows and we can't get tenants, we can't compete with the office space next door, so we have to upgrade, and then the other benefits that come are something else.
I think I think that's it. Like, at the end of the day, real estate's real estate. Like, you have a property that's valuable, and then keeping up with the understanding of how that equity is built, and the one that's been in there existing in the market since the 70s. I can't tell you how many towers I looked at that were saying, you know what, let's look at putting a secondary glazing system on the inside in order to basically make sure we're going to maintain or manage that overall heat gain on the building. You know what I mean? And then when they actually did air tests on the building and they went through it, they're like, oh, this building isn't even sealed anymore. So they actually went through and just sealed the building for maybe an eighth of the cost, or even if that was the cost of what it was. They just went and actually just updated the gaskets. They updated and actually did seal it, and they saved 30% of that overall energy, right? That all of a sudden they just immediately paid it back in that simple payback program. Like, it was a huge thing, but it's something, the fact of going, okay, we did that, but are we willing to then go and actually like upgrade the costs, upgrade this envelope, or upgrade this thing to then compete against that? Like, that is going to be the thing. I think we've seen such a growth in the market with it's interesting to see this retraction happening right now, or leveling off because of the office space and what's happening there. But I think we've still seen equitable growth in the overall real estate market. It's now an understanding of what's going to be happening with those adjacent buildings, because there is current inventory supply that far exceeds what even the land supply is going to be within the city, right? Within those metro markets. So now your next that layer of that next frontier are those that retrofit design, that retrofit world. And I bring that up in the prediction is because I think we're going to be valuing that, maybe incentivized or forced to look at that direction in some of these 2030, like going to cut these 2030 acts or 2050 acts as far as cutting carbon emissions by half. Like, those types of things are being talked about because there's certain penalties or things that kind of go from 2026 to 2030. Like, you're going to start to see those things that are going to be there. But I think the evolution is going to happen quite extensively to look into, okay, what is the efficient way to do this? Is there to stay away from the fines, but also down to actually like upgrade my building? What is that next step? And so I think retrofit is going to be and I think it's going to be a wake up call, for a lot of the contractors out there, because I don't think there's a lot of contractors out there that understand how to do it. Is my point is that I think there's always like the special projects division within a GC or within a subcontractor of some sort, or a Glauser, right? They have the special projects division, and these guys have seasoned, been there for how many decades doing those types of things, have migrated to that work. And I think there's a place where it's just like one guy exists within a company, and now there's 10 companies, and that one guy, you just kind of refer work to him. I don't think you know what I mean?
Yeah. I have a buddy in the Northeast. He does the special projects, and it's just the messy work that no one wants to touch. Right. A skylight repair, a glass replacement here.
It's super messy. You have to be afraid because you have no idea what you're about to be in for, right? You have to be at the ready to turn and bob and weave. It's like it's dark water, right? I have no idea what's behind this when I pull it out, when I open it up, when I gut it, when I tear open this area. So I call those guys Sealant Team 6, because they are the hardcore ones that show up with their caulk guns just ready to get at it. And they're a rare breed. I think they're going to become a little bit more of a staple. Like in our market right now, and I know it's the same in a lot of markets because we're hearing it. The owners have to keep up with the new projects that are coming up all around them. We have more residential new than we've had in decades in our markets, and it's tough to keep up with it when you have an exterior facade that nobody wants to be within 3 or 4 feet of many times a year. So our exterior facades here, we have that, they call it a 4-foot sensation, where if you, in the summer, if you stand, you can feel the heat from 3 to 4 feet away, just pounding through these, single pane, really garbage aluminum exteriors that were put on back in the day. And the same thing, and when it's cold out, you get up 4 feet away from that window, you can feel the freeze sort of poking through it. So nobody wants that when there's a new option available across the street that I can lease for not that much more, or even if it is more, I'll figure it out or whatever. So there's that piece of it. And then these units are just failing. They're failing.
Yeah.
So the replacement rate is going to drive what is happening on that. So as these, whether it's the glass units failing or the entire assembly just starting to fail out, we're seeing failure rates of the units are becoming because the replacement, the consistent replacement of them becomes the burden that you then balance against a complete go for this thing.
If a facade or forensic consultant comes in for an owner and they do an assessment and they say, you can replace the gaskets, you can caulk over it, you can just replace the glass, you could replace the full window, or you could do the full facade reclad, full gamut, and they give them option A through E with costs associated with each. I think part of the problem is that a lot of these systems are not easily upgradable, so they weren't designed with maintenance in mind. So you can't get access to that chicken head seal, or you can't get access to certain components, and we're really left with something that we don't know how to address.
Oh, Band-Aids can't, like the great Taylor Swift said, Band-Aids can't fix bullet holes, right? But no, it's, and we've seen that, as the internal build out has changed, because in some units, like they built down over in front of the units to put the ceiling heights in, and then they put awnings in, then they went and rebuilt it. So there's a lot of times there's so much stuff on the inside, you can't even get access internally to get anywhere close to getting that glass out of place safely and effectively, let alone affordably. So you're already on the outside of the building. Now you're figuring out, how do I get down to these areas? How do I get into these spaces? So even to do the Band-Aid work really becomes significantly challenged. So there's a lot that it needs to get played out on these jobs and how they're being looked at.
Well,
but I would say, hold on, shush.
Yeah, please.
I would say that in markets that are trending older, there's no choice but to really think that retrofit has to be the next big piece of the industry. Yeah. It's a very real monster that I think is about to creep up. So when we're sitting on this thing in 5 years from our little, space huts, we have to look back and go, like, remember when we didn't think retrofit was going to be as big as it is? I really truly believe that retrofit is like the next big sweep that is.
But have people been talking about this for years? Do you hope it's the next big thing, so there's a lot of construction activity, or do you really think these buildings are going to be properly addressed?
Well, because in our markets, sorry, Brad, I'm going to go again. Sorry, in our markets, like Seattle's a pretty small market geographically. We've got the water on this side and the mountains on this side, and then so from a available spaces, unless they want to try to build a new Seattle out in the middle of the state, which nobody seems to be too excited about doing, we have to either continue to build up smartly or fix the buildings we already have so that they are now, a good usable sense. So the rebuild, I mean, they're not knocking, this isn't the Nevada strip of Vegas, right? Where they just implode a building and build up the new fancy next one. So they have to look at it from I only have so much space. I only have so many buildings. I need to fix what I have. I think that's the drive.
Yeah. So there's a lot in this to unpack here. And I think the first part of it, going back to what you said with Nikki Baggs' mantra of just looking at that and saying, single pane retrofits. I think actually has validity to it, is because there's a reglazing effort that has to happen with it, but then you have to have intelligence of what you're actually putting that single glaze retrofits inside of. So then there's adaptation systems that then will have to make sure that there's accommodations for that. It has to do for sealants, for structure, for a lot of different things that are traditional to it. But single glazing allows you to investigate that easier, rather than let's just put a triple unit inside of something that's only supposed to be dual glazed, right? Like that's
Well, compatibility to the frame, then is the
Exactly.
glass is failing, but then the glass to the frame, and then what about the frame to the wall? Is the leak actually
That's my
coming
point.
at that interface?
The whole domino of that. But single glaze enables you to look at that in a way that's way more intelligent because of the overall weight and structure of that single glaze application. It enables you to look for adaptations. It enables you to actually really improve thermal, and then but do adaptation pieces that are actually in a lighter gauge format, just to basically so you're accommodating sealant and glass, right? So you can then manage some of those domino effects. Now, with that said, I wanted to kind of go back to really commenting on, do we want retrofit to be amazing, or is it just something? Is it really going to be amazing? The want versus, because we've been talking about it forever. That was your question, Adrian. Like, it was just like, we've been talking about it forever. Do we just want it so much? That's why we're just kind of willing it into our position. There's actually been a real large migration for a lot of exterior envelope facade people, and I'm talking specifically in the glass and glazing market, that have migrated to exterior envelope ESCO world, that energy services companies, and have migrated into that world of what it actually takes to retrofit a building, but also equate it into real energy savings. There's actually been some really early adopters and innovators that have actually went into the market and actually started to breed that. So I think that there's some seasoned veterans that have done that. We're just on that innovation early adopter side of that side of it, because I think it's and then as a result of that, it's just, I think you're going to see a large blossoming because of what Walker said. Obviously, you only got so much inside of those metro markets that have to be revitalized. Urban landscape has to become more interesting rather than just a new building.
Yeah, but forget about it, and let's just talk from a selfish standpoint.
Yeah.
Contractors, designers, the industry just wants to see more activity. We want to see the construction industry and facades thrive. So I think there's this inherent want to say, like, okay, let's say all this new construction goes on pause. We still have this whole existing building stock that can be very fruitful for everybody.
I also think that there's a fear factor for a lot of owners and developers and other things, because the people that tend to control that market have job titles like forensic engineer, right? Like, that's terrifying. Like, okay, hold on. So I need a water doctor to come out and look at my building. That's millions and billions of dollars, right? So how much of the fear factor exists for a lot of these guys of like, that sounds scary. I think we're gonna float with this thing as long as we can, versus the reality of when you add more contractors to that market, when you add more competition to that market, the price levels out and becomes more realistic and more affordable. And so instead of a $8 million build, it's a $3 million build, or 3 million becomes 1.5. What are the real costs, right? I don't think anybody knows, because again, the forensic doctors of water and exterior envelope surgery are the ones controlling that piece right now.
Fair. All right. I think we need to do a part 2 to see how some of these continue the conversation, but see how some of these came to fruition at the end of the year.
Sure.
This was a lot of fun. Get ready to see both your faces on the internet. And telling each other the shush. That was probably the best part of the episode.
Look,
so thank you both.
You can't be business partners and not say shush every once in a while.
Absolutely. It was in good, kind heart. What's the best way for everybody to reach both of you? On LinkedIn or some other platform?
And we're available everywhere.
Yeah, I would say everywhere. LinkedIn is a really place we're active most right now, because I think there's just a lot of value that's been happening, a lot of new frontier that's been happening there with our industry. But obviously, email, where you just go to our website. We're on our email there. You guys can grab us anytime. But sure, shoot us a message, man. Like,
check out our MySpace
conversation.
Featuring B-dubs. All right, guys.
You know
Thanks
what?
for having
I will
on.
say thanks, Adrian. You're awesome in the industry. I really just want to give you a shout out.
Thank you for
what you've been
driving
doing.
this, man.
Thanks for driving what you've been doing, having a passionate understanding of it, and also the constant conversation of it. It's been enlivening for everyone. I was only imagining what it's doing for yourself, man. I really appreciate
Keep the spirit
you
going,
what you've been
dude.
doing.
No, I appreciate you guys being honest and coming on. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Until next time.
All right, see ya.